And hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm Colita Stafford, partner at IDEO, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Justin Massa. Hi, Justin.
Hi, Co. How are you?
I'm good. Justin, we're doing a podcast.
This is exciting. I
I
haven't
know.
done this in a long time.
Well, we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
And we are thrilled to be joined by a lot of people around the globe as well. So
So many people.
as
This is really cool.
as you're joining, please tell us where you're calling from in the chat. We always open up the last portion of our podcast for questions. So please feel free to start thinking of your questions for Justin. Today, we'll be talking about the power of data and storytelling to overcome common challenges that arise when putting together your business strategy. So Justin, as folks are logging on and joining us, let's just start. Tell us about something in your space, something around you right now.
All right. So I spent a lot of time at this desk and I'm a little bit fidgety. And so I have lots of wonderful things to fidget with. I also have, I've had a few hand surgeries. I have carpal tunnel. And so I have this ridiculous hand thing here, which is great. It's relatively quiet and it's usually like within arm's reach.
And so just your fidget.
My fidget
guessing,
toy. Yes.
I'm
It's like a
guessing
strength
others,
fidget toy.
You know, the more people are on Zoom these days, the more it helps to have physical activities around you.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. So if Justin, if for those of you joining and listening, if Justin were a Venn, if your brain were a Venn diagram, I would say it'd be these four things. It'd be data, stories, strategy, and food.
You nailed it. Yes.
We're going to talk about three of the four. We're not going to do food today.
Fair enough.
So just to tell you a little bit about Justin's professional background, because you do have quite an extensive one. So Justin has done extensive client work on venture design with an emphasis on strategy. He's worked at the intersection of data science and design, B2B products and services. You currently play the role of business development for all of IDEO North America Consulting. And you also play a significant role in our DE&I leadership team at IDEO. Before joining IDEO, Justin has an extensive background in data and analytics, including you were part of the Chicago-based Datascope team, which you helped IDEO acquire it. And you also, I know you are the founder and CEO of Food Genius, a food service data and analytics startup that I understand was acquired. So this is Justin. Is there anything I missed, Justin?
I grew up in New Orleans. That's about it.
Ooh, that's we
a fun
probably
place
have
to grow up.
We probably have some New Orleans folks. We definitely We've got some folks from Virginia, Bristol, England. Hello, welcome everyone. Oh, we've got someone from Portland, Northern California, lots of folks all around the globe. All right, so for today, here's what we're going to talk about. I love this topic. We're going to cover three major common challenges that you've experienced, people often face when creating a business strategy. And you're going to share how storytelling and data, both of those together, can help overcome those. And you're going to share some real examples as well. So one of them, I'm just going to give an overview. We're going to talk about when a team can't agree on the problem to solve, when you're trying to troubleshoot general possibilities or get unstuck, and when you can't maybe agree on the solution of which solution out of your strategic choices and how to move forward. And of course, we're going to open up to questions. So with that, I can't wait to get into more. I will say one last thing. For those of you joining, if you do want to have more context about our IDEO's approach to strategy, we're not going to talk about it in depth today, but we do have a course called, and I'd invite you to check it out, called Designing Strategy. Justin's going to pull some examples from that. And also, if you're great at strategy, but you want to brush up on storytelling, we have some great tools and frameworks in our storytelling course, Storytelling for Influence. So given all that, let's set context, Justin, with regards to strategy. So I think that people believe data is important with strategy. Mm-hmm. Why is storytelling? Like, what are the trends that you're seeing that make this such an important blend, data and storytelling?
Yeah, So, if I rewind, so I've been at IDEO just about 7 years. And if I rewind to when I started, I would meet companies who were really passionate about understanding users and hearing their stories and building profiles of kind of personas. And then we would meet other companies who were deeply driven by data and they wanted to do surveys and analysis. And usually they weren't kind of motivated by both, right? You can kind of pick one or the other strategy. My sense is that that has radically changed over the last 7 years. That when large companies want to get confident about doing something, when they're exploring innovation, which means taking risks, they want to kind of mitigate as much of that risk as they can. And it no longer is the case that you can either do some kind of human research and tell some stories, or you can do some quantitative analysis, whether that be surveys or actual data manipulation. I think you now have to do both every single time. I mean, my sense is that I love how you highlighted those two courses from IDEO because I think they go together like peas and carrots, right? Like storytelling and data go hand in hand. They absolutely do not pull against one another.
So tell me a little bit more too, like, let's talk about storytelling in particular. Why does that help in moments of strategy? I can see why it can be great when you want to engage, but what does it have to do with strategy?
So when you're engaging in kind of setting strategy, making choices, activating those choices, fundamentally strategy is a bet on the future, right? It's here's our best hunch about what's going to happen next and what that means we should do as a business. And I think it's critically important, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but I think it's critically important when you're making a big strategic decision with a team that you make that future state as tangible as possible. Charts and lines and graphs and data simulations play a critical role in making that future kind of feel tangible, feel real, feel experienceable. I think storytelling does just as well. And I think when you do the two of them hand in hand, it kind of satisfies kind of the left brain and the right brain halves of everyone. It gives you this ability to kind of understand the future quantitatively and qualitatively.
I love that. The both sides, the head and heart, so to speak.
Yes.
I've also heard you say, strategy involves a lot of decision making. Like you said, you're placing bets in the future. So is there also a role? How does storytelling and data help with that decision process? Does that have a relationship?
Absolutely. I think, my sense is that over the last 2 years since the pandemic started, it's gotten a lot harder for organizations to make decisions. I think it's been driven by a number of different things. I think it's been driven by the Great Resignation. And so half the people you work with, you haven't worked with them for all that long. I think it's driven by the fact that we're not in person with each other. And so all those small and subtle cues about someone being confused or supporting or leaning in or leaning out are much, much harder to detect over something like Zoom. And I think it's harder because the world is much more uncertain and there's a lot more, the world is changing at an ever accelerating pace. And I think those three things together just make it harder for organizations to make decisions. And so when I think about kind of working with someone who's making a decision with an organization that is faced with a big strategic choice, why not use every possible strategy you can, right? Like a little wonky there saying strategy on strategy, but like, why wouldn't you use every possible tool in your toolbox to help the organization make a decision, right? Quantitative and qualitative, they work incredibly well. They speak to slightly different audiences, and together they're really compelling.
I'm so inspired already. I'm so excited to hear more and learn more how I can do this. But before we get into examples, so Justin, what if someone is not really skilled in data? Like, what if you don't have a lot of experience with it, or it's not your? I think people opt out of saying, "Well, I don't do data. It's not part of my job." Is there? How can you feel comfortable, or what are some of your tips for people to be comfortable with data or start to learn in that space?
So, nearly every large business today has some kind of a data science or analytics function within it, right? And in my experience, either those folks have been tightly incorporated into the rest of the business, they have friends and colleagues all over the place, or, in lots of businesses, they're a little bit lonely. They're kind of out there in the corner. They do unbelievably amazing work, but maybe they're not the most robust storytellers. And so the message doesn't always get to the right audience. And full disclosure, like I'm not a data scientist, right? Like I can write code, but you really don't want me to do that. So I find collaborators, I find people to work with. My own craft really is deep in storytelling, right? Like that's one of my core skills. I love nothing more than collaborating really closely with a team of data scientists who are unbelievably good at things like simulation and modeling and forecasting. And together, I find that it's a really compelling case that we can put together. So I think if this isn't your sweet spot, make some new friends. I'm sure that there's people in your organization that can do this well.
That's so encouraging. I mean, I'm also not a data scientist expert, but I think one skill that helps everyone is start to learn how to ask questions of data even if you don't know how to get the answer. So
Yes.
getting curious about is one skill I think all of us can practice and then make friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the tips I would offer for people as you kind of, well, one would be if you're not on the data side, reach out to them, right? Go out and find them. I'm sure they're going to be eager to talk, but encourage your new friends to make their work visual in a way that you can understand. I think as IDEO kind of incorporated data scientists, all of our early successes hinged around teams collaborating to make the work highly visible and visual to extend who can engage with it.
This is your theme, making it tangible, whether it's a strategy or data. So let's go there. Let's talk about these three challenges you've often encountered and how you help teams through them. So the first one is this idea of helping a team align on the problem or a set of stakeholders. So for example, this is often in the early stages of strategy. People talk about how important it is to align on the problem you're trying to solve before you come up with solutions. So how do you guide teams through this? Why is this such a major roadblock? How do you think about it? And how would you encourage others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am kind of immediately reminded of a story here, Co.
Okay.
And that is some work that IDEO did with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis. So it's a number of years ago, we started having a conversation with St. Jude, and the experience for parents and kids who have cancer who are going to the hospital, it's a trying day, right? You wake up early in the morning, you go to the hospital, and the first thing that you have to do is have your vitals checked to see if you are healthy enough that day to get treatment. If you are healthy enough, you then have to go to a myriad of clinics and treatment rooms over the course of your day. And then finally, at the end of the day, you go back to your kind of residential dorm or your house. It is a highly variable experience for those families and kids, right? Like many times they wake up and they don't know what's going to happen the rest of that day. So what we found when we started working with St. Jude, so, the question was, what can we do to fix this? How can we kind of improve the experience of the flow of the day for these families and kids who have cancer?
And did they have an initial idea of what they thought the solution should be?
Every single team we talked to had a different idea, Co.
Oh, really?
I'm sure you're shocked to hear that. So we talked to the administrators and the schedulers, and they were totally convinced it was this. We talked to the doctors, and they were totally as convinced a different issue. We talked to the nurses. They were convinced it was something else. We talked to the pharmacists.
So all over. Okay.
Everybody had a slightly different explanation for what was going on. So what we did were two different things in the beginning. First, the thing I think you would expect a firm like IDEO to do, we went and spent time with families. We met them in the dorms in the morning. We spent the entire day with them, following their day, really getting an understanding of what it felt like to be going through that experience. The other thing that we did simultaneously was we pulled a mountain of data. So we got every single appointment. How many times had it been rescheduled? How long did you have to wait when you went to that appointment? How long after you waited for that appointment did you have to go until you got the next one, right? And what we found was that everybody was a little bit right. And if I'm being blunt, everyone was a little bit wrong in their hunches as to what the right solution would be.
Well, because each person has a different view into the same, they don't all share the same. Yeah.
It is.
So keep going.
To your point, Co, everybody had their own point of view and saw the solution from their point of view. And I think to your initial question, aligning everyone around what the actual problem was foundational to even thinking about what the right set of solutions might be. So what we did was we built what we call an exploratory explanation or explorable explanation. There's a whole kind of class of category of data visualizations that fit under this bucket. People search online, you'll find a whole slew of really amazing examples. So an explorable explanation is a dramatically simplified version of it's a dramatically simplified version of what we think is happening in the world. What we did was,
Justin, you're amazing. So everyone's like, can we just blur your background for a moment so we can focus on you? And keep going.
No problem. I saw it come through. So what we tried to do is take a very simple model of what happens as patients flow through the system over the course of the day. So we ended up coming up with a kind of funny name for the simulation. It became anecdotally known as Angry Balls. So what we did was we visualized every patient as a little dot on the screen, and the longer that dot had to wait, the more it would start to shake. And so your mission was, as you were doing this, that you wanted to adjust the sliders and kind of adjust the way in which the simulation was working, which is really, you were prototyping different ideas of how patients could flow through the system with a mission of having the fewest number of little bouncing balls sitting there.
In each room, like it's a visual of the layout of the different rooms or moments in that journey that a patient has to go through.
Exactly. Yep. So a patient comes in and they go to their clinic in the morning and they have to get their vitals checked. They leave the clinic and they go to the waiting room. They leave the waiting room and they go to the medicine room where they receive their treatment, much of which has radiation in it. So it has to be very carefully controlled. And then each of those chairs in the medicine room, those prescriptions have to be filled by a pharmacist. There's the finite number of pharmacists. So what you could do with the simulation is fiddle with everything, right? How many patients are coming in each hour? How many pharmacists do we have? How many chairs in the medicine room do we have? And then critically, you could flip back and forth between two strategies. One strategy was scheduling every single person. And when we met St. Jude, they were rescheduling 97% of these appointments. They had a team of, I think, 20 full-time appointment setters who did nothing but reschedule appointments all day long. So you could do that version, or you could switch to a first in, first out. So seemed wild to everyone when we suggested it, but let's just get rid of the entire idea of setting appointments. Show up, and the first person who gets there is going to be the first person who gets a seat.
So let me just recap, because it's fascinating. So you're using real data. This is the historical data of averages.
Yes.
You brought it together into a visual simulation that you can then play with different parameters in it.
Yep.
And what is the impact then? What did it enable people to see and feel when they looked at data this way?
So there are two. So we did all this work. We had a meeting with the full set of stakeholders. So administrators from the hospital, the CEO of the hospital, the leading of the nursing team, pharmacists from the medicine room, everyone in the same room at the same time. I was sitting on one side of the room and one of my peers was sitting on the other. And the head of the hospital leaned over to one of my peers and looks at the screen and says to her, "Is this really what it's like? I can't believe this is what the experience for patients is." I'm sitting a few across the other side of the table next to the head nurse. She leans over and whispers in my ear, "Justin, this is exactly what every day feels like." And to me, what I think it was a great way to ground everyone in the room in an understanding of how all of these complex forces came together to impact what the patient experience was.
Yeah, that's a key thought there. You said how all these forces came together is one part, but how it impacted. There's a lot of emotionality in this story, in this experience. And that's what I'm intrigued by. So just to recap, at a theme level, why would you say data and storytelling helps when you're trying to align around a problem? What can it do for a team?
I think what it can do is it can help many different folks on a team who are coming to a problem with different points of view, different hunches as to how you can best fix it. I think it roots everyone in a shared understanding of what the problem is, and it begins to orient them towards an understanding of kind of the area where solutions are going to lie. None of the hunches that the folks at St. Jude had at the beginning were what we ended up pursuing. Right? Everybody had a bunch of different ideas. We ended up finding a very different solution for them that made a ton of sense. I don't think we would have gotten there if we hadn't aligned everyone around understanding the problem through using a simulation like this.
It's magnificent. So great. We've got some questions around it, but I'm going to hold for now so we can move on to our second example. This is great. So another moment in strategy is often, so maybe teams are aligned on the problem and there's a lot of possibilities. You already mentioned it, like different parts of the team may have different ideas. And so, or the opposite, where a team is stuck and they're only coming up with like the same thing. So again, for the next challenge, why is this a common moment of friction in the strategy process? And how do you think about data and storytelling in that moment?
So, I think, let's say you've done what we just talked about, right? You've aligned everyone around the problem, and now you're stepping towards like, all right, what do we do next? It's not like the challenge gets easier, right? You would think that like, oh, we've aligned everyone in the problem, the solution gets easier. It's like, no, you got to continue to keep everyone aligned. So we were working, this was last year, over the course of the pandemic. We worked really closely with a nearly 100-year-old electronic components manufacturer, and they're a leader in their space, have been for a very long time. they had gotten, if I'm being honest, they had kind of lost sight of their customer, right?
Okay.
They had really begun to lean on kind of their technological prowess, their engineering, their research and development to think about new products. And they had kind of lost touch with some of their customers. So when they came to IDEO, kind of the headline of what they were asking for was digital transformation. And they told us, we scratched the surface. We realized that was really a code word for they wanted to innovate in the way that digital era companies innovate. They wanted to be very close to their customers and have customer needs fuel their product development pipeline. So we do an organizational assessment. We meet with their entire executive team. And one of these days we're hosting a conversation with them. It's this unique discussion format that IDEO likes to use called creative difference, where we kind of ask people to physically position themselves around a room. In this case, we did it virtually, along a set of attentions. And we had a warm-up tension, and the warm-up tension was to go on a road trip. Do you need a direction or a destination? And we thought it would just be fun. I'm definitely like, I just need a direction kind of person. And then we didn't really
a destination.
I love it. And I didn't think too much else of it, right? But about 2 weeks later, I felt like we were kind of beating our heads against the wall, because every single time we tried to orient the executive team to kind of decide what was the next step going to be, they would start to argue about, well, I can't describe the destination precisely. I don't know exactly what we're going to be like when we get there. I don't know if we can do that. So we came back to them. We said, hey, you know what? That kind of jokey thing that we used to start our conversation, we think that actually is really resonant here. What we're hearing from all of you is that you're all aligned around describing the direction, but you're not yet aligned around the destination. And so rather than continue to wring our hands and argue about what the destination should be, let's use that direction and just get started. And so what we created, it was kind of a rallying cry for them. So, we created what is literally like a zine. We had it printed for them on kind of
as in a magazine.
Yeah. Like the cool version, we had printed it on, big newspaper format paper. We mailed it to the CEO so that they could give it out to whomever in the company they felt was appropriate. And it was really a rallying cry. Essentially what it was, it was us orienting them around the direction, even if we yet weren't able to describe that destination. It made the direction tangible. It made it experienceable. It made it something that all of them could kind of feel in their bones. They could hang it on the wall of their office. They could pin it up on the cork board in their home, in their work from home place.
So what I like about this too, and we're showing some, but there's a lot you can't show for obvious reasons. So the big theme here is when there's a lot of variation in what people think they should do, storytelling, you're using that as kind of the heart of it, and kind of uniting where what the common points are, or just what was the big theme here for how you use stories in this moment of strategy?
I think what we did is when we met them, they were definitely still trying to sort out what kind of a company did we want to be, and how are we going to connect that to the company we have been for nearly 100 years?
Got it.
I remember in talking to them one time, their founder has this famous quote about perfection that's up on the wall. And they said, that makes it hard to fail. And innovation
sure does.
Inherently means you're going to fail over time. So what we tried to do through this zine and through this storytelling was connect their past to the future that they were headed towards.
Got it.
And so what we really focused on was trying to say, this isn't actually this kind of left turn transformation in setting this new direction. Rather, this is actually an inevitable evolution of the company, given everything you have done to date. And I have to say, it really changed their attitude about it. They got much less anxious about not being able to exactly describe the destination. And since then, they've made a mountain of progress. So we did this work for them the middle of last year. I actually had a check-in with the CEO last week, shared with me that they are standing up an entire innovation team. They've gone through a complete reorganization of the business, and they are already beginning to bring to customers products that they developed just last year, which is probably the fastest product development cycle they've seen in decades.
It's amazing. So, and what I hear in that story too is, I think it's a common thing. There's a lot of legacy organizations, and it does feel hard to find permission to think differently and behave differently. And so part of what I heard you say there too is you didn't go into a lot of detail, but you were looking out in the future. So sometimes the future is your best friend in enabling you to start to shift and think differently. and tell stories about that versus,
Yes.
Do you have, I know you have one more story around,
I do.
We need to go there
I
on this
love this
topic.
story.
Okay, go for it.
So this is one of my all-time favorite pieces of work we've done at IDEO, simply, frankly, because of kind of the scale and impact of this work. So IDEO's worked very closely with the Ford Motor Company for a number of years. And rewind, when was this? This is probably 2016, 2017. We were doing a bunch of work around what would eventually be the 2021 Ford F-150. So if you're not familiar with the Ford F-150 or Ford's business, the Ford F-150, if it were a company unto itself, would be bigger than Tesla. It has been the most popular vehicle sold in North America, I think, for the last 40 years. It is the cornerstone of Ford's business. Okay. Ford is a 100-year-old company. We already talked about this a second ago. You can imagine pretty high stakes in making any kind of change to the flagship product for one of the premier brands and companies in North America. High stakes here. So IDEO did what we always do, right? We go out and we talk to customers. We talk to non-customers. We understood the needs that they had. But then we really dialed up the storytelling. So when we were at the point of presenting solutions to them, we built on what I can only describe as a full-on museum quality and scale exhibit. So we put posters on the wall. There were interactive exhibits that you could go up to and engage with. And then, and I think this was among the most critical parts, is we had what in the automotive industry is known as a buck. So it's a vehicle that has no engine in it, but otherwise has all of the other features that you might imagine. And giving Ford executives the ability to literally climb inside of the vehicle, see what the full workstation slides out in the middle feels like, put the seats in the front all the way back and make them lay flat, and imagine taking a nap in the truck after a hard day of work, plugging in a Sawzall to the back of the bed and seeing it actually work because you've got power in the bed. All these features today are inside of the vehicle, right? And they don't feel completely wild today. I can tell you, when we were showing this to Ford in 2016, 2017, 2018 time period, these were radical changes from what they had done in the past. And if we hadn't made it experienceable for them in this way, they never would have done it. I'm really confident of that insight. This is the kind of decision that a business is only going to make when they can touch it and feel it and talk about it together.
And when they can get together, that was the big word too, together.
Yes.
So you created this as an experience that many people could come through and be a part of. And just so we don't intimidate anyone who saw some of those photos, it was museum quality. It was amazing. There are very lo-fi and scrappy ways of doing this. In fact, we had your colleague Steve Schwal on in a previous podcast who talked about low fidelity prototyping, including ways that you can bring others along. So what an amazing story.
All of this, I think, scales down very, very nicely, right? I mean, we were doing this with an actual vehicle. You could have done that with some beautifully printed posters and a bunch of foam core, right? And get the exact same type of outcome from it. Now, this was a really high stakes decision, so we went kind of over the top for it. But, you know, that was the culmination of a lot of work. There were many kind of lower stakes, lower fidelity moments that preceded it.
That's great. But just to summarize, so what about this approach was so impactful?
I think it was the combination of deep research and insights about customers, data about what's happening in the market, experienceable prototypes of solutions that directly addressed both of those things, and presenting all of those things together in the same moment in a way that people can experience it in groups. I think that was kind of the recipe, right? You'd have to, all of those components were necessary for this to be the kind of compelling case to make a really big decision that ended up being the right decision. I mean, the vehicle has remained unbelievably popular, and all of those features translated over into the new all-electric Lightning.
That's so helpful. And I think you helped identify what I think people, when we hear the word storytelling, we think of a person on stage with a beginning, middle, end. And in this case, what you're saying, storytelling can be experiential. It can be a blend of experiences with data, with information, with moments. I think it's part of it. That's the human part of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
a single person telling a narrative story is great. It can be incredibly compelling. It's a limited approach, right? You're going to have some amount of people in the room who are going to be compelled and some amount of people who are going to remember most of what you say. But if you supplement that with prototypes, with interaction, with various different voices in the room, different modes of storytelling, it just becomes much more effective.
Yeah. So we're going to go to our last challenge, another common challenge, and then we're going to open up to questions. So another point in the strategic process is often the final phases, where maybe you have an amazing set of possibilities, and the team needs to make some strategic choices. This is often the hardest part.
Yes.
Feels very high stakes. So tell me about, how do you think about data and storytelling in this moment?
Yeah.
Let's do another story. I know you have one.
I do have one. So this was, I'm trying to think of when we started this work. I think we started this work with our partners at 1848 Ventures. It's a subsidiary for Westfield Insurance. This was in, let's call it 2017, I think. So just really quick background for everyone. Westfield Insurance is they were founded in 1848 as the Ohio Farmers Insurance Corporation. They're a regional insurer that's a true mutual. So they have no owners, but they're current customers, which I think it's a wonderful model. And if you ever want to go down a fascinating rabbit hole, investigate mutuals. They are literally the most sustainable form of a business in human history. The average age of a mutual is 150 years old. And mutuals exist.
Your stories keep getting older and older. And older.
I love working with old companies. It's just a lot of fun. So working with 1848 Ventures, it's a new venture arm that this insurance company created. And specifically what they wanted to do was create new products that served their current customer base, help them mitigate the negative effects of risk, which is what insurance does, but critically, were not insurance products. Insurance products are heavily regulated. They're regulated state by state. And so they wanted to deliver the same kind of value to the same kinds of customers they've always worked with, but frankly, avoid some of that regulatory state by state hassle that comes with the insurance business. So they had a hunch very early on that helping businesses mitigate the negative impacts of weather could be a big opportunity. So we do some initial exploration with them. We talk to restaurants, we talk to hotels, we talk to doctors' offices, a whole bunch of different kinds of businesses. We end up identifying restaurants as a segment that we really cared about. And as we continue to dig in with restaurants, we realize that they care about weather because restaurants have a hypothesis that weather affects traffic. And every single restaurant owner deeply cares about how many people are going to walk in the door every single day.
And those frontline hunches are often some of the best places to look.
Absolutely.
Those people do know. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Keep going.
So we get to this kind of early point in the work where we know that there is a deep level of desirability from restaurant owners to have insights about weather and foot traffic. But we had no clue if we could actually do this, right? So we went to a bunch of restaurants in Chicago. We asked them for some of their data, and we started making some predictions. And I remember there was this moment in the project room. We're making predictions. We've got this kind of chart projected on a whiteboard. Multiple data scientists are like drawing on top of the chart. You know, I'm not a data scientist. Very data-y. It was impenetrable to me. And I'm like, look, I know that this is the prototype. Like these are our predictions, but I don't think any restaurant owner is going to look at this and be able to make any kind of a decision off of it. So what we did was we took all of this work that we did in data and we simplified it to a set of plain language sentences. And what we did here was we kind of glossed over all of the challenges of figuring out what the interface might be. We glossed over basically lots of how we would deliver this value from the product and said, hey, what if this was the insight that you walked away with? Would this be useful to you? Would this be helpful to your business?
Like, give me read out one example of something that was said. Like, can I do this? Like, the one example of a human-centered sentence would be, a snowstorm is predicted. During similar events in the past, you typically experience a 10% decrease in customer traffic.
Exactly. And our question
you may want to adjust your staff for this.
Yes. Was that specific enough for them? Did they need more information? Was it too specific? Like, what's the right level of fidelity? And I have to say, when we took these out to restaurants, immediately realized these were incredibly valuable, right? Every restaurant owner started telling us all the different decisions they could make. We got really deep insights about what was going on in this industry. So we would commit to building out this product, right? We think what we were able to do in a really short period of time was connect the desirability that we had found in the very earliest stage of research with the feasibility of delivering on these insights using the tools of data science. And it was, I think, the combination of those two. We did a little bit of like early pricing testing as well.
Yeah.
And I think that combination of early pricing testing to understand the viability of the business, making sure that we could actually make predictions that would be desirable, to kind of the pairing of feasibility and desirability, we were able to demonstrate that quite early in this evolution of this product. So at the time, its code name was Busy. Fast forward to today, and Busy is live. It's now called Lineup. It's in more than 100 restaurant locations. And I think there's a team of about 20 people at 1848 Ventures that are full-time focused on this as a new venture for them. It is the most mature product that they've launched.
What an amazing story. So again, to just summarize, so some of the things I heard in that was, I liked how you said, you guys, you had a set of data, you jumped to an output, and you didn't even know if you could deliver on the output, but as a prototype of the future that made the value really obvious.
Yes. Yes. We knew that there were going to be challenging kind of interaction design things we would have to address. I mean, this is data visualization for restaurant owners to make decisions very, very quickly. Not an easy thing to do. I mean, we had early questions like, could we even do this on a computer? Like, are there computers back of house at restaurants? We didn't even know in the beginning. We thought we might have to do all this in a cell phone. There are computers back of house at restaurants. We would eventually learn that. We decided, rather than try and get bogged down in the minutia of all those questions early, which is
the implementation
easy
questions, it's
exactly.
really easy.
It's very easy to do. And I think many teams get pulled into that and they miss what's really kind of the bigger critical question. Once we were able to demonstrate that restaurant owners deeply desired to have these insights and we could use data to get to these insights, we knew the rest of the problems were very solvable.
Got it. I love that. I think that's so inspiring. So Justin, let's flip to some questions. We've got some great ones.
Awesome.
The first one is around, a lot of folks are asking about the resources. And so Adnan is asking, like some of the tools or resources you've mentioned in the storytelling with data, are there some resources you recommend? And another question from Eliza or Elisa, examples of lo-fi storytelling that delivers, if you don't have the resources to do like a whole simulation. I can actually help out with that one.
Yes. All right. I'll take the first one. You take the second one. Go.
Okay.
So I think, so for Anand, the question around like what kind of resources, like where to go. I think there are two things that I would encourage everyone to do. One is if you Google explorable explanations, you'll find a myriad of examples. And I get familiar with some of the examples, right? There's a really amazing one called The Parable of the Polygons that is an interactive explanation of how residential racial segregation works, that I think highlights to everyone how you can take similar kinds of approaches and really scale down the fidelity, right? It's this beautiful and interactive kind of narrative piece. I would encourage everyone, like, do it over lunch one day. It's incredibly engaging to spend time with. There's a number of others from the same team that put that one together. But I think you can get inspired about how to dial that back a little bit, right? I've done very similar things where there's no kind of slick and cool interactivity, but it's a series of kind of like, I'll basically use Google Slides almost like a storybook, and then just put, single images, put them in a sequence. So I saw someone ask the term to search for is explorable explanations. And there's a whole beautiful array of them out there. The one that I really love is Parable of the Polygons.
And just to follow up on that, because both the Parable of the Polygons and like the St. Jude simulation, what are those usually created in? Those are coded, correct?
They are typically coded, yes. And so if you want the interactivity, you're frankly probably going to need to find some friends, because the interactivity piece, I think, makes them really engaging, but is like, I certainly couldn't make them interactive. But I think as a step before, like to get confident if that's a good use of resources, absolutely, like build a really simple version that isn't interactive. Almost think of it as like a choose your own adventure storybook and go from there. Yeah.
So building on the choose your own adventure. So one of the techniques that I've used and I've had other teams use is within Google Slides or PowerPoint or Keynote, you can make a light layer of interactivity just by setting up hyperlinks. So one time we had a story, and it was a map of different kind of users and how they thought about their relationship to different products. And we created it as kind of this land of feelings. And you could click on one land and it would jump you to the story of how people felt in that land. And so all it was in the back end was individual Google Slides or PowerPoint slides with just an icon that links you, that jumps you. So in the storytelling moment of it, it feels like you can weave and narrate and move around.
Yes.
I was just going to say the other thing too is, but nothing replaces, we're kind of talking about technology, nothing replaces human storytelling. So that's where you were going to go. You say it, Justin.
So I was going to say, I think all of the amazing simulations in the world don't amount to a ton if they aren't paired with kind of the human side of the story and narrative storytelling. And so I think that's where I have a hunch a lot of folks in this call probably come in. That's the skill set that you bring to the table. And when you go out to find those new collaborators, those new colleagues inside of your company, be direct, like, this is what you bring to the table. This is how you can help them. And in turn, this is how they can help you.
Yeah. We've got some great comments too on other tools like, yes, Figma and Miro and Mural and some
Figma's
of these,
great.
There's where you can create a very vast digital landscape.
Yes.
To bring together data and stories and weave people together. So much good stuff. We're going to go to another one, another common theme. This is about kind of openness and readiness in cultures. And so this comes from Debota. What to do, and pardon me if I got the name incorrect, I'm sorry. What to do when stakeholders resist participating in alignment? Or Amy, how do you get partners comfortable with discussing a problem?
Oh, these are great questions. So one thing I have a saying that I'm fond of using, and I full disclosure, I didn't make this up, and I don't remember where I got it. But many leaders have a rule of meetings. So most of the time in the first meeting, it is a bad idea. Somewhere between the second and the fourth or fifth meeting, it is an interesting idea. And by the third to sixth meeting, it is their idea. So one thing I tell people in this situation is persistence really matters. If you go to a leader in the business and you take a problem to them and you get a little bit of a brush off, take it to them again, right? If you are confident in what you found, maybe take it to them a third time. If you get to like the fifth time and you're still not getting anywhere, you might need to rethink your approach. But I think persistence is one of the big things here. Second thing is, I think, if you remember from the St. Jude story, everybody saw that problem from their own point of view. And I think if you lead with curiosity about their point of view of the problem, rather than lead with confidence in what you think the solution is, you're going to get much further, much faster, right? So kind of approaching someone and saying, hey, I've identified this problem. I'd love to understand it from your point of view. I find that there's very few executives and leaders and collaborators or colleagues who don't want to tell you what they think the solution to something should be. And I think that when you invite people to start, so common approach I'll take is, have a conversation. Someone tells me, oh, this is my hunch about the solution. Invite them to make a prototype or work with them to make a prototype, right? You can start to kind of invite them into the process of addressing the problem and thinking about new solutions. And the next thing you know you've got someone who is a big skeptic as a big advocate.
That's so great. I think we have time for one more. I'm looking for, okay. This is a great one. Comes from Stephanie, and this is about complex data, simple storytelling. So that's quite simply, for complex data, how do you simplify it? And I think we see what most people do is they keep it all in because let's be fair. Like, all data is interesting. I think it is, but not all data is equally important.
Yes.
So how do you guide people when they are in love with too much data or there's too many details, and how do you simplify it?
So I think this might sound a little bit weird, but I think the best way to approach simplifying complex data is to make a lot of it visual very early in your work, and critically make it visual to people who are not data scientists. So the way that we got to that simulation from St. Jude that we shared earlier, that was a conversation between an interaction designer, an architect, and a data scientist. And frankly, it wasn't the data scientist's idea. He knew that we wanted to simulate something, right? And he would quickly arrive at kind of the specific simulation that you saw. But it was only through work that preceded that simulation, right? One of the things that we did, it had such a funny name. We called it the rainbow tornado. So we had a chart that showed the average waiting time for every one of the different clinics. And we put every different row as a different color. And so it kind of started like this and went down. It looked like this like weird rainbow tornado. putting that up on the wall in the project space was the conversation that then led to this data visualization. So I think when teams that are working with complex data work in isolation, and then at the last minute join their efforts with other colleagues and collaborators, I find almost all the time there's way too much information, it's overly complicated, and it pushes against the storytelling rather than flows with it. So to me, the way that you do this is much, much earlier in your process. You've got to be highly collaborative with folks working with data from the very beginning of your work, so that when you get to this moment of storytelling, especially the high stakes stuff in front of like the big executives, you've had an opportunity to not just think of how do I prune the data, but how do I craft a story where data and narrative is really woven together in a way that's really powerful.
So helpful, so tangible. Thank you, Justin. I would add to that just the thing too of it's about anchoring in insights. It's not just the information, it's the interpretation that like, it's back to where you started, that like tugs at your heart, that makes you tip your head. So back to those emotions. Justin, we are out of time. I do have one last question for you, Justin, and just two last tips for everyone joining us today. So yes, if you want to deepen some of your storytelling skills, I encourage you to take our Storytelling for Influence course. I've learned a ton from it. And if you are looking to build more skills in strategy, including like understanding some of the moments that Justin talked about today, I encourage you to check out our IDEOU course on designing strategy. You can find all of these at ideou.com. Justin, my last question for you, and then we're going to sign off. What advice would you have given your younger self?
So, we've kind of covered this today. With any given moment of your work in professional life, there's various levels of fidelity to which you can do a thing, right? It can be kind of like that level of the Ford F-150 where everything is pixel perfect, all the way down to, it's scrappy and I've drawn it on Post-it notes and taken a picture and put it into Google Slides. I would give myself the advice much earlier of thinking intentionally about the right level of fidelity for any given thing I'm working on. I think early in my career, I frequently would wildly overshoot the level of fidelity and frankly made a lot of work for myself that I didn't need to do.
That's great advice. It goes back to the perfection.
Yes.
Progress over perfection.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much for Justin joining us today. We've been talking with Justin Massa on weaving the role of data and storytelling in strategy. And thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to hearing and hopefully you being inspired. Go out, try some of these things and enjoy your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Coach. This has been great.
Thanks, Justin. Bye.